Hi everyone, lovely to be here. One of the reasons my name is difficult is because it's a combination of Swedish and Danish, and probably we stole all of it from the Roman Empire back in the days. So, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for the invitation to come here, back to your lovely city and country. Thank you to the organizers and to my friend Audimas for making this happen. If my contribution here today sucks, it's his fault. Because he helped me to figure out what was supposed to be good. No, joke aside. So I have divided my contribution in 3 parts. So first part a bit about talent, second part about some of the principles from the educational and talent development sector that I've been part of, and lastly, if we have time, share some pointers towards what I think is a good educational model and talent development for the future, basically. So let's see how far we get. So, when it comes to talent, it's really interesting because in Denmark, we have spoken about talent development for a long, long time. And it's a very timely topic today in the age of AI, etc. But when we think back and we think, what did talent actually mean back in the day? It had very little to do with what we think of it as of today. It was a measurement. It was a weight. So talent was something that you used to pay for something. It was a way to construct weight. It's not until we get into the biblical side things change. But before, maybe take a look at this, because it gives an idea of how people think about talent today. I wonder where I should place myself so you can actually see what I'm... And there are a few things that I would like to draw your attention to. One is the domain part. When we speak about talent, we normally speak about a certain domain. We don't speak about everything. We speak about a high level, not just above average. And we speak of it as someone, an individual. Now, I will challenge that part later. But returning back, in the Bible, I think it's the Matthäus part that challenges this idea of what is talent. And it's called the parable of the talent. And it's a moralization of talent that kicks in. And I'm not sure how much biblical studies you have done in your life, but largely the story goes like this. You have a master that is going on a journey, and he gives talents to 3 of his servants, and he asked them to manage them to their ability, making the talents grow. And when he returns a year later, 2 of them have doubled the value of that talent. The third has not. He has cowered down. He was afraid to do anything, so he didn't do anything. And he was then rebuked by his master, telling him that you are supposed to cultivate the talent given, regardless of its size. So it becomes a moral obligation that we have to do something with the talent that we are given. Today, I think most psychologists would agree that talent is not something that we are born with. It's not just that. It's also something that we develop through education, through our work, through our interests. I think we also can agree that it's not so simple as to say someone is talented regardless of its context. You can be great at football but suck at chess. You can be successful in one corporation and not in another. So it's contextually dependent. And not the least, it's dynamic. It goes up and it can go down depending on who is actually looking at this. If we take a more radical consideration when it comes to talent, there is something to be said about how we understand today's society, where up until maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago, we thought of it very largely as an individual responsibility, or perhaps the teacher's responsibility, or something of the sort. But today, I think there is a large argument around that it depends on the system, and talent to an extent comes out as the quality of the system. If you take a classical example from the Scandinavian countries, you have, for instance, the music schools of Sweden. Why did Sweden have so much music talent? Many people would argue that it so to some extent depends on the municipality music school that allowed everyone to cultivate interest for music. It's also about attention. You have all heard the expression, what you give attention to grows. But it's also something about permission. All of you could have talents that you had no idea that you were really something you were fantastically good at. You just never tried it. It can turn out that you are amazing at wrestling. It's just that you never ever done it. No one gave you the permission or encouraged you to do that. So the permission aspect and the attention aspect is becoming increasingly important for, say, educational systems. And again, we don't develop talent in isolation. We are depending on what we are part of. So I'm leaving you with this question around that. That maybe it's not so much about historically. For instance, I've been running in an educational institution. And when it started, part of our key objective or key capability, if you want, was that we could detect talent, identify talent, and then select them into our education. But it's also a question of what are the conditions that we have put into the world to support whatever talent we get. Take, for instance, the question of football. If you come from Brazil, you can sort of develop any type of system because you have talents that goes in all directions. If you come from a smaller country, you have to develop the system based on the people, on the players you have. You cannot dream about having Messi. You don't have him. You have to develop another system. So sharing some stories from all of this and how to cultivate that creativity, that curiosity, that courage that we think will drive talent onwards. And I wanted to share a bridge from the question of talent with these stories. Today we are moving, and I will return back to this, very much more in an attention, an age of meaning. Because if we find things meaningless, we don't tend to invest a lot in it. And we know as employers, as leaders, that we need to cultivate for the meaning within our schools, within our institutions, within our companies. When I started going to school, or indeed way up into the age actually at school, there was only one thing that mattered, and that was subject. That was how you displayed command. You know something, you're able to repeat what the teachers have told you, apply it perhaps at some point, some logical thinking, but essentially you got a grade out of that, and that is what drove your future. Today, we understand this very differently. It's not enough to display a command of a certain specific subject or knowledge. Much more aspects, competences, define how successful we are when it comes as us as individuals or as groups. So for instance, the question of social skills, the social competences are massively important. I'm not sure about how it is in Lithuania, but in Denmark there are 7 jobs that are available for those people who cannot work with other people. Lighthouse guards. We have 7 lighthouses left. If you work here, you don't need to be able to get along with other people. Apart from that, you have to do that. Can you get things done? There is tons of people that knows a lot of things. They know a lot of other people, but they can't get things done. And the ability, of course, to change. Those of you who are a bit older, you have experienced tremendous amount of change throughout your lifetime. Not just small things, but societal changes. So how good are we in adapting to new realities? When we adopted this model and we worked with our students, something that became abundantly clear to us is that still today, most people are hired because of their command of this particular subject. How good are they in knowledge? But they are fired for all of the other parts. Couldn't work with other people. Couldn't get things done. Couldn't adapt. A story that I think is increasingly important in an age of meaning is the idea of who sets the agenda and who have ownership over that agenda. We had a student years ago called Mikael who joined the school with a particular purpose. He wanted to work on creating the first national team for Tibet in terms of football. He had traveled extensively in Asia, and particularly in Tibet. And he had seen the decline of culture under the regime that had taken over Tibet. He was also a passionate football fan. So he said, what I want to do is to combine the two. Can I combine to restore and cultivate the culture by providing them with a football team? And he set out on that journey. And for 3 years, he developed that project. And today, I think you still can find one of the documentary movies that was made called The Forbidden Team, which is on YouTube, which is super funny if you have the time. When you see monks playing football in Tibet, it's different. It's certainly different. And the end of that project at the school was that he had organized a fight between Tibet and Greenland, just outside Aarhus in Denmark. Yeah, it sounds super funny when you think about it, and it was funny at the time. Greenland is about 50,000 people, etc., and they were going to fight Tibet. There was, however, one country that was not very happy for this game taking place, and that was China. China hated the idea. So what happened was that China, they made a call to Greenland and basically said, what is going on? What are you up to? If that game ever being played, you can forget about selling fish and shrimps to China. And Greenland said, we have no idea what you are talking about. We need to call the foreign office in Copenhagen. And they called the foreign office and said, what are you up to? We have a national incident on our hand with China. And the foreign office said, we have no idea what you're talking about. Eventually, they figured out that it had to do with our institution. So we received a phone call saying, what on earth have you done? We have a major national incident on our hand. And we said, we have no idea what you're talking about. And by the way, he has graduated. So pushing joke aside, we called Mikael up and said, Michael, we have an issue. And we need to figure out how to handle this one. So we said, Michael, you have a choice. You can pursue the game. It is your right to do that, but there will be consequences. And Michael said that, I understand the situation perfectly. This is what I've been trained for. I will go and meet the Chinese. And so off he goes to the embassy in Copenhagen, and they let him wait for a very, very long time before he's entered into the embassy, meeting the ambassador. And he tried to explain why this is such a good idea. Also for China, they are not very receptive because they say Tibet is not a country. You cannot possibly have Greenland play against Tibet. There is not such a thing. So what Michael is then trying to explain himself, then something happens, and that is that his mobile phone is ringing. That is his girlfriend. But Michael picks it up and says, hello? And she says, hi, Michael, what are you doing? And he says, I need to take this. It's the CNN. So basically, the Chinese back down, the game takes place, and there is now a national team of Tibet. It's an interesting story because, again, who sets the agenda? Is it the school? Is it Michael? Is it Michael and the Tibetan team? How do we support, how do we cultivate all of the challenges that comes with this? Another story, a bit closer to home for you, is the inception story of the institution I was running. And it takes us back to the 80s in Denmark, where Denmark was a very different place than it is today. The youth unemployment was skyrocketing, and the interest rates were something about 24% perhaps. It was a very, very different time. Denmark was also feeling a bit lost. There wasn't so many things to do. Much of the things that we today take for granted weren't there. And in Aarhus, the second largest city, they had been cautious that much of this youth unease were taking place in Copenhagen with occupations, civil unrest. So in Aarhus, they tried to do something to say, how can we work with that? And they created an initiative called the Frontrunners, which essentially went something like this. You are young, you don't have a job, you are not at university, you have no chance to succeed in sport or perhaps in music. So what are you going to do? We give you a place, a room, an empty room. We give you space, 9 months, do whatever you want. And we set a counselor and a phone book at your disposal. Now, there weren't one person. There were maybe 30, 20 people. And then something interesting happened. So the counselors, because we normally think of counselors in those days as someone to tell you what to do. And they reversed and said, what would you really like to do? We have 9 months. What would be the thing that you really, really would like to do? And the young people said, we would like to party. And then the second thing the counselor did was to say, that's a great idea. Of course we're going to throw parties, but we're going to throw the best parties this town has ever seen. You raised the bar immediately. So you took all of that unease, all of that untamed creativity out there, and you fueled it towards direction. They did. And even today, these institutions run some of the best parties in Denmark, 40 years down the line. This grew, because what happens when you throw the best parties? Everyone wants to come. Suddenly the entire town came to these parties. They created cultural festivals. Some of the first startups that when we started to use the language of startups came out of this. People learned how to do logistics. They learned about audiences, performances, all of those things that come from running cultural festivals. There was another group in Denmark called Next. And Next, they had one objective. They wanted to take away nuclear arms in the world. So they worked with disarmament. And they had tried to convince the Americans that they would give up their nuclear arsenal. It didn't go down that good. It's also on YouTube, actually. It's super fun to watch when some of these young Danish people tried to convince American generals that we have an idea for you. You should have no nuclear arms. And they say, what are you talking about? Now, something had happened in a country very close to here. We had a man called Mikhail Gorbachev that had taken power. And he spoke about glasnost and perestroika. And Next said, let's show him what that is all about. So they say, in order to do that, let's bring people together. So they went to the frontrunners and said, hi, we have an idea when we would like to ask if you want to join. And the frontrunners said, so do you have any money? No, no money. Do you have permission to go to the Soviet Union? No, no permission. And as you may recall, you couldn't go there without permission in those days, at least for us Scandinavians. And then they said, if we actually get to Moscow or to Leningrad, do you know what we're going to do there? No, no idea. So then we said, okay, we're all in, we are going to do this, absolutely. And 1.5 years down the line, around 2,000 young people crossed the borders into Soviet Union in what was to be called Next Stop Soviet. And they organized cultural festivals on the Red Square and in Leningrad. And on the eve of the end of the event, one of the main organizers were interviewed by Danish TV, where this image comes from, and he was asked, when do you think we're going to see changes coming to the Soviet Union? And he said, 15, 20 years from now, all things will be different. 4 or 5 months down the line, the wall came down. And it really changed something. I know that a ton of people are saying that, yeah, I could see it all the way through. It was super clear to me. Very few people, as I remember from those days, actually said this is going to come down in 4 months. So from that we learned something about all of that noise, but also to pay attention to those weak signals, those things that maybe is emerging, but not very, very clear. What are those signals that goes on in our world? We learned something different too. Because even if this had been a cultural success, it had been an economical challenge and a managerial fiasco with a lot of burnout and stress, etc. So the question the organizers asked themselves were, what type of education would we have needed in order to make such a project happen? And that was the birth of the institution called Chaos Pilot. So it grew out of the street with that question where you raise all of your deficiencies, all of your learnings into a new type of institution. I can already now see that I have prepared a 3-hour lecture for you. So I will make it a bit shorter. But I think this one is an... no, we drop that one and take this one. It's interesting how when we change perspectives on things. The guy on the bicycle, his name is Henrik. In contrast with the guy Mikael that focused on the national team of football, Henrik joined with a big social heart. I want to see change. I want to devote myself to something of importance. I just don't know what. What is that? So he spent a lot of time figuring out what would be his big thing. Then he learned, a bit out of coincidence, that in Denmark we scrap something like 6,000 bikes every year. We throw them out because we can't really repair them in a financially responsible way. And he said, surely those bikes must have a value somewhere else. They can't just be metal value, scrap value. And then he spoke with his cousin, that would be the redhead guy. And they talked about Tanzania and how the infrastructure did not support all the cars and all the things that we normally associate with a modern country because the rain takes the roads away. So they convinced certain collaborators in Denmark that they would collect all of these bikes and ship them down to Tanzania. That became the organization Baisikeli that brings all of these bikes together, bring it down where they are renovated and repaired and used by everything from firefighters to ambulances to taxis, etc. In order to finance that, he needed to bring something back to Denmark because the containers are full when they go one way and not so much the other way. So he convinced one of our biggest companies called Novo Nordisk that they would use the bikes for their employees from when they park their cars going to the plant. It's a bit of a distance. Could you have used the same bikes for that? This is the most basic, fundamental, entrepreneurial aspect of thing. Looking at one resource in one context and say, in what other context can it provide a higher yield? It also goes for culture. Where can something provide a bigger value? Let's take the... no, we take this one. I think this one is more fun. Don't you agree? Yeah. So we had students that were super dissatisfied. They weren't happy with their education. Super talented people, but they had been given a shitty deal, basically. So they had not come out of... their second year at the school had not been great. So there was a bit of revolt. And again, weak signals becomes very strong signals. You have talent, but without direction. So what do you do with that? We put in a new leader for that group of people, for that class. And he was, I'm not going to say physically assaulted, but certainly verbally assaulted by the students, where they complained about their education, etc., etc. And he tried to explain that, yes, this education has not delivered on its promise. But that doesn't mean that the rest of your education can't be great. I want to give you that challenge. If you lean into this education, next year will be really, really good for you. What happened? 6 girls went up to him in the break and said, "You suck." And that can be very intimidating for a young man. I said, basically, you are the worst. And he said, yes, that may be, but I still give you the challenge. And the girls took it. They took out a globe, they span it around and put their finger down and said, where that finger lands, we will go and do a project. That finger landed in Sarajevo. This is a few years back. So it was just after the Civil War, and around 250,000 people had been killed or dispersed across the European continent. They knew about this vaguely, but there is a difference about reading it in a magazine and actually experiencing it. So they go down. They go down there and they look for what could be a worthy project to throw ourselves at. An interesting aspect is that they thought about something quite interesting, because many of them were Norwegians. And in Norway they have something called the Kon-Tiki Museum. Have anyone visited it? Kon-Tiki is that river raft that they take across the water, basically, and Thor Heyerdahl that did it. One thing is that he proved that it was possible. The other thing that he thought of was he thought about documenting it while it happened. So if you listen to any American president, they normally say this is a historical moment every time they give a speech. How do they know? We don't know, right? It's the future that judges if it was a historical moment or not. But he thought about documenting it while it happened. It had never happened before. It's the world's most viewed documentary movie. 500 million people have seen it. They thought about this and said, we should do the same. Let's call the production company in Norway and see if they want to make a documentary movie about us. It's going to be about 6 girls going to Sarajevo to figure out what to do. And the production company said, I think this is a good idea. Let's do that. I wonder how that call actually went down. But they agreed, and off all of them went to Sarajevo, and they started to look for a worthy project. What they quickly discovered was that people were not very optimistic. Hope had abandoned Sarajevo. So they had now found their particular target and said, we are going to restore hope to Sarajevo. That will be our work. Secondly, they identified that building that you can see behind here called Nadik. And it used to be the youth house, the cultural house during Tito. And now it was controlled by the municipality and the mafia. A bit unclear if it was the same people or two different groups. But the girl said, we want that house back. That's what we want to take back to the young people. So they started to negotiate, threaten, convincing them, all the things you can imagine, that how to convince them to do something like this. And eventually what the people that controlled the building said was, okay, you can use the outside, but you cannot go in. They said, that's good enough. And they thought about another thing, and that was that in Berlin there had been a cultural festival where they had covered the Reichstag with canvases. They said, we could do the same. And they said, in order to restore hope, we need to focus on the emerging generation. So they gathered around 1,000 young people that drew the hope of Sarajevo, what they hoped the future would bring, and they covered the entire building in those canvases. I was sitting in Poland at the time and watching Deutsche Welt and saw this being transmitted on TV, because they had, of course, grown up in the media age where they learned it has never happened if it's not on TV. So the project could have stopped here, but they thought about that opportunity that had now come across and said, what can we do more? How can we take this success one step further? And they said, we can't do it down here. We don't have any more ideas. We don't have more resources. But we could take it back to Scandinavia. So what they did was that they collected as much as they could. They drove it back to Norway. And they had some art students turn it into art objects. And they auctioned it away. The money that they collected, they brought down to start a foundation in Sarajevo that bought access to the house. Very often when we work with talent and creativity, what is driving us is not necessarily complacency, nor is it the finished part. It's we should ask ourselves, what now? What else? What more? That is truly where we take it to the next step. I wanted to give you something about, well, we dropped that one too, and we take this one, because I think there is something about understanding the times that we are entering. I don't expect you to read all the details. You can have it later if you want. But essentially, we come from an industrial age where the main objective of education was obedience. Those of you who have a certain age will remember when you were told that your main thing in school is to be obedient. Do as the teacher tells you. Those of you who have worked in such companies will also know that you had a managerial orientation, which was largely about command, control, and consequences. Do as I say, I will control that you do it, and if you don't do it, there will be consequences. These things do not happen. We don't move from an industrial age to an information age in one blow. It's not so that we wake up one day and everything is different. It's a gradual thing. In the information age, some of the first real writings we have is from the 50s, and a man called Clark Kerr. He used to be the university chancellor of University of California, and he did a few interesting speeches at Harvard, where he pointed out that what is going on in our world today is that we see a larger and larger focus on information. And what is the consequence of higher education in this new age? And he put his finger down and said, we need to be a knowledge production facility. That is the birth of the research university. Producing, collecting, and distributing knowledge. That essentially stems from that point. What happens today? What is the age that we are living in? In lack of a better name, I just call it age of complexity. But we certainly see a very big difference when it comes to what is the organizing aspects. What are the things that drives us? It's not so much command control anymore. For those of you who have worked up in the 90s, 2000s, etc., very largely what you experience is not so much managers tells you how to do things, but they tell you what to achieve. And then it's up to you to figure out how to do it. That's the best time to be a manager. You can have all of these weird ideas. I said, I just want to have a phone that should work in this and this way. Make it happen. That is changing. And we see meaning, motivation, and movement kicking in as the main organizing aspects. And on a small note, when it comes to talent development, when we think about how managers distributed their time, back in the day, they paid a lot of attention to the people below them, telling them again what to do and how to do it. They didn't pay so much attention to themselves. How could I be a better manager? Or to their colleagues? Or to their bosses? During the information age, something different happened. And even a man called Drucker, he identified this already in the 60s, where his prognosis was that we would end up something like this, where he said, what is the consequence of having workers that know more than the managers? Well, it means that they are going to self-manage. The manager needs to spend less time on them and focus more on not making mistakes herself or himself. They should focus on people over whom they have no authority. Their peers. Historically, every company that I've tried to help, they love this model. Because all the managers conclude, or chairmen or CEOs conclude, why I don't succeed as a CEO is because I have shitty employees. They should lead me to be a better CEO. There is some truth to that. So normally when I speak to students, I said, you should make your teacher great. If you do that, you will have an amazing educational experience. What do we experience in our time? But what did this forget? It forgot that people also need support. They need a sense of belonging. They need meaning. They need some sort of motivation that kicks in. So what we are going to see is a much more difficult aspect for teachers and managers alike, where they have to restore some of that attention to people over whom they have authority. But they also need to focus on people that are not part of their circle. Collaborators, audiences, customers. All of those people that you normally 30 years ago didn't pay so much attention to. we will have to save some of the principles for the next time, but on a note to leave you with, when it comes to building the new institutions that cultivate talent, that cultivate creativity, that cultivate all of the things that we would like to see more of, there are a few things I think that are essential. And maybe this one is the model that I like the best, because it tells you that fundamentally, any type of organization, may that be a school or may that be a company, if you can provide a sense of self to the individuals you work with, a sense of self-worth, understanding who you are, where you come from, what are your values, a sense of community, that you belong, you are part of this, you are not apart, some sense of skill, you are good at something, you can do this, together with a sense of direction. This is where you and we are going. If you do that as an institution, I would say 20% of the job is done. But most don't. The higher education, at least, could certainly be better at providing this. I have a timer. I'm out. We will have to leave the other. We have to leave the other for the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, dear audience. Thank you so much. Please don't leave the stage. Dear audience, you now have a couple of minutes to scan the QR code, which you see. Well, you won't see. You now see it. You can scan the QR code and you can leave a question for Christer.
Yes, good enough.
We're on the first name basis now.
Yes.
So you can now leave a question for Christer. And I'm trying to refresh the Slido app. But whilst you're typing the questions, I have some as well. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, let's start. So you often speak, and you now spoke a bit about navigating complexity rather than trying to control it. What mindset shifts are the most difficult for leaders and institutions today?
I think one of the biggest problems is our natural attraction to predictability and stability. It's really difficult to give up something you're good at for something that you possibly could be great at. It's really, really hard to do that, to take that leap. I think that we, as institutions at least, one of the dilemmas that we often face is this part that we want to promote exceptional outcomes. We want to create something that challenges the status quo, but all of our systems are aimed at stability. So I think that part is maybe the most difficult one when it comes to this.
In your presentation, you talked about moving from knowledge to meaning. How does meaningful work and meaningful leadership as well as work actually look like in this age of overload, speed, and distraction for you?
Yes, for me, when I work, so today may be suitable for this group as well. I have maybe trained around 200 cultural entrepreneurs in the last years throughout the university in Stockholm. And what is clear to them is that they have a very, very strong sense of protecting their creativity. We are essentially building a new narrative around what does it mean to be an artistic entrepreneur. And so that meaning part, I don't think that we are necessarily given it. It doesn't suddenly come down from heaven and we feel meaning. I think meaning is an interaction with things. That when we engage with things, at one point, for some reason, something clicks with us. And that when we find that meaning, virtually a lot of the challenges that we are facing is going to be much easier to overcome. In today's society, when I just look at my older children, which is now in their 20s, it's clear that the exposure to possibilities run the risk of slowing them down. They don't take decisions. They wait. Because a decision means that you rule out others. If you take, for instance, I saw it also when I used to run the school in Denmark. When Facebook came about, do you remember that button called yes, no, maybe? I don't even know how many times we organized things and we had like 2 yes, 5 no, and 200 maybe. I think that is the best symptom I have on the society that we are part of. We want to say yes, but we don't want to exclude anything. So I think those people that really are able to cultivate a dual mindset, openness, and ability to be in turbulence and uncertainty, but at the same time have a clear idea of that this is more important for now. I think that helps.
We have many questions. I'm afraid we will not be able to answer all of them, sorry, but we'll try to. Why go complexity, not back to simplicity? Wouldn't closer connection to the teacher or manager would provide meaning?
Repeat that one, please.
Why go to complexity and not back to simplicity?
So 2 reasons. One is that I don't think you can. I think today's world simply requires you to accept that it cannot go back because there are so many things that affect. It's not so easy to say that, well, I decided as a company that I only want to sell to these people and not to the others, etc., etc. It doesn't work like that anymore. However, I think also there is a managerial challenge when it comes to reducing complexity to simplicity, because what does that promote? It doesn't promote creativity. It doesn't promote innovation. Simplicity in that way is about reducing the number of connections that exist in the world, and that excludes the possibility of 1 + 1 = 11.
Christer, can we do a speed round now?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, what's the name of the documentary about 6 girls in Sarajevo?
I can't remember. Just look up Sarajevo project, Chaos Pilot.
Do managers need to become psychotherapists to Gen Z snowflakes?
No, I would certainly, so one of the reasons I would not want to work only with those people, the answer is no.
Where do you find inspiration?
I'm an avid gardener. The older I have become, the more happy I am to spend time in my garden.
Do you believe one finds talent in himself or herself, or we need some help?
If one can find it within.
Yes. If we can find it in ourselves.
I think we are, as social creatures, we are largely depending on what other people think of us. So I think that the talent is a dynamic interplay between us and the reactions we receive when we interact with others.
Very serious one. Do you believe in God? And very personal one.
No.
And the last one, how to manage all the chaos which happens at a different project. Isn't this super stressful for managers and educators?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Christer.
Thank you.